Hi, I'm Mark Gibbs with The Great Outdoors, and it's good to see you back if you're coming back, and if it's your first time around, we're happy to see you here too. So, we're getting frigid outside right now. It's one of these great weeks where we were in the 80s last week, and boom, we're going to be in the 30s tonight. So, we're going to talk about protecting house plants, things you can do, little tips to help you out, and then talk about other potted plants outdoors. But first, we're going to start with our little fig tree. If you didn't see this segment earlier on in the fall, we did repot this. We were giving some tips on how to repot, so you could check that video out. But he's looking fantastic in this pot, so we're really happy he's performing so well. He can take the freeze, so he's going to end up going back out there so he can go to sleep for a little while and regenerate some roots. So one of the reasons we have this saucer under him, when you bring plants in from the outdoors, they're used to our typical humid cycles. You bring them in, we're going to have air conditioning on for maybe a couple days here and there. We'll have heating on, but it's dry air. So if you need to, you can put a little faux environment around them. You can see we've got this saucer here with some rock. We can put some water in the saucer. We don't need the plot down in the water. That's why we're using the rock to suspend it. But that water in this immediate environment is going to create a little bit of a humid pocket for it when it's dealing with that dry air. You can cheat and put things in your bathroom. If you've got a large enough bathroom, some good light. That shower environment is going to give them that little bit of humidity. This is a great way to do it. Also, if you group your plants together when you bring them in, they won't feel so lonely, but they'll also, when you water those plants together, that little environment around them is going to be a little higher humidity because of the moisture leaching out of the soil and drying out over time. So those are some little things. Something else you need to be careful of when you bring those plants in from outdoors. You want to start looking before you bring them in for any kind of pests. It's really important to isolate any disease or insects before you bring them in, because once you get them inside, those insects are going to be like, oh, look what they gave us for the winter. So you want to knock them out before you bring them in. So just isolate any issues like that, get them treated so you're ahead of the game when you bring them in. You can also use a mister once they get inside. If you've got tillandsias or ferns of any kind on the fern family, there's lots that are work for the interior, have a mister handy. They're going to parch a lot faster, and they're going to need that misting treatment when you're inside. Calatheas, violets, maranthas, sensitive vine, succulents of any kind, those guys are all going to be ones you want to watch when you initially bring them in, because you're changing the light and you're changing the temperature. The cool thing with succulents are that you can push out that water cycle to a 10-day period during the winter time, sometimes even 2 weeks depending on the size of your container. So definitely be sensitive on your water cycles when you first start watering them. When you bring them in, they may not dry out as fast. Ceiling fans are going to make a difference. Whether they're near a vent is going to make a difference, and that dry air. So definitely when you get on a cycle, try to stay regular with it. And then be careful with fertilizers. You can get to a point when the plant's going into dormancy where that fertilizer is not being taken up, and you can get some residual buildup in the soil that would be pretty rough on the plants over time. So be sparing on your applications of fertilizer during peak dormancy. Then this would seem obvious, but it's not quite sometimes. Whatever light they're getting now, you really don't want to change that light dramatically when you bring them in. You may have to get some supplemental grow bulbs. There's some great LED ones out there that throw some really awesome spectrums. So do be prepared. If you see some discoloration on the plants, do be prepared that it may just be that you're not getting enough light. And that's going to affect the coloration of the plant and how many leaves it's going to hold on to. So if supplemental lighting is needed, you'll be able to figure out pretty quick. And definitely get that in there. It's going to make a huge difference on how they hang out during the winter time. Lastly, a lot of people wonder, well, can I put them back outdoors? What we want is those nighttime temps to stay above 50 or 55. What gets affected is not as much the top side of the plant, but the roots of the plant. When those roots get that cold sensitivity reaction, they shrink up and the plant will wilt, and it's really hard to get the plant to stand back up once it's gone through that wilting. It's not like you can put warm water on it and all of a sudden it's going to perk up. You really want to be careful about the extended period of time it's out there in that 55 and 50 below range for an extended period of time. If it's acclimated to it, that's one thing, but if it's an extreme exchange on temperature, it's going to be a hard hit. So watch that. Try to get them acclimated and start bringing them in. And then again, if we're going to have those days, which we will, where it's going to be in the 70s again and the nights are going to be in the 60s, then it's okay to put them back out and let them get some fresh air and some fresh sunlight. It'll also probably help with the water cycles and getting some good steady evaporation going again. Also, terracotta containers, glazed containers. Glazed containers are sealed with that glaze, so they're only evaporating from the top. You're going to have a really different evaporation ratio when you bring them in and they're out of the sun and they're out of the breeze. Terracotta will breathe throughout the container. Another great thing is this is a wonderful time to repot plants is during peak dormancy, and we'll hit that later on in the winter. But think about whether it's in a terracotta pot, glazed pot, they're going to be on different watering cycles. I can guarantee that. So on the outside end of the scale, there are different types of insulate cloth out there. We sell it by the linear foot, and it comes off the roll at 4 feet wide but opens to 8 feet wide. So you can buy this, you can drape it over your plant material, make sure you're securing it well. Once the wind gets underneath here and it lasts for 10 or 12 hours, it's going to push it and push it and push it, and all of a sudden you're just going to have a kite. You're going to go see it flying by and you're going to be chasing it. So secure it really well. We use these clamps a whole lot around here. You can use landscape stakes, something like that, to seal the ends together, and then landscape stakes to get it seriously anchored to the ground. Rocks will work, bricks will work, but make sure you're anchoring a substantial portion of it. That's really important to keep that in place. Wind burn, when we get wind burn from a dry cold front, you will see these leaves parch. And sometimes it's deceptive. People think it's freeze damage. That's going to appear differently than dehydration and wind burn. Even though plants technically don't respond to wind chill, it's the dry air. It's pulling that moisture out of the leaf and it's going to parch it. So just be careful when you're securing this cloth. You can also get the cloth already pre-cut in larger sheets. You can cut this down to whatever size you need or use the large sheets. I also like to have some bamboo stakes handy. I just took some floral wire, made a little teepee here. This can go over something like an Aurelia or something you want to protect, gingers, things like that. You can make these little teepees, put them over it, and then secure your cloth to that. When you're done at the end of the season, you just wrap it back up and stick it in the corner. But these are easy. You can stick these stakes down on the ground, so it is going to give you some anchoring when you put them down there. Things like that will help these guys can help keep your temperature up 3 to 4 degrees. And then another thing you can do is you can add some old-fashioned mini light. You don't want LEDs because LEDs don't put out any heat. The old-fashioned mini lights, doesn't matter what color, are going to put out a little bit of heat, and we're only talking 3 to 4 degrees when it's freeze time to help on that buffer room that you need inside your insulate cloth. You can wrap the trunks, you can just throw it in there in a bundle, whatever. It just will help with that heat situation and keeping it a little constant above that 32 zone. If you've got potted plants and say you've got a deck or a balcony or something like that, you're going to make a little teepee form or a little PVC frame and put the insulate around it. The insulate will let the sunlight through and it will give you a little bit of airflow, but you can add a heating mat. We sell these guys. We showed these earlier on one of our segments about seedings, and you can take this and unroll it and put it underneath your pots. It's got a temperature adjustment, or it'll just hold at a steady temperature, but that's going to wick up into your container and into that soil base and that root system, and that will make a big difference on keeping those roots from taking any harm when it's an extended period. You can wrap it around the pot depending on how big the pot is. Make a little girdle for it. It will help, and again, you'll get that plant to adjust a lot better instead of having an extreme swing. The other thing that we talk about when you're going to have a heavy freeze coming in, if plants are in the ground, we do recommend go out and give them a spray with some water. Ice is an insulator, so once it does freeze, everything inside that pocket is actually going to be okay. But in a container, when it's above the ground, depending on the type of container, and you water that container heavily, strangely enough, we had a spell in 2010 where we were below 32 for 2 weeks. Well, all of that soil in there will begin to harden and it will ice up and you will get damage to the roots. So if it's in the ground, that's one thing. If it's in a container, the top side, misting that and having that a little bit moist is great. But having the pot too soggy, you might have one big ice cube and that could be really risky. So think about that when you're getting out there and how fast the freeze is going to get hit, how long it's going to last. And if you have a chance again and the days are nice and you can take the cloth off when it's outside, or you want to move your plants out, that's just as good. We want to get that sunlight back up. We want to get some natural airflow for evaporation and help that plant wick out any excess moisture, especially we've been rainy on the spell we have coming. So it's going to be pretty wet once these guys get covered up, and we do want that sunlight and air back in there to help with some evaporation. So if you do have any questions, just remember you want zip ties handy, you want these clamps handy, you want some landscape stakes handy, and then just be prepared, start acclimating your plants to get them indoors. And please, if you're in the nursery and you have any questions or you need to find anything, just let us know. We'd be glad to help you out.